Sicura nei υπεροχοναΐσαι επικέντρο του κόσμου ως η δεύτερη Ρώμη. Ελπίζω σίγουρα να μην συμβεί τίποτα παράξενο με αυτόν το υπερβολικό πλούτο. Scatta, this Sunday can't get any worse, can it?
So take me back to Constantinople. No, you can't go back to Constantinople. Been a long time gone. Constantinople, why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks.
Istanbul hours geldiniz. A city so large in size and historical capacity that it both took me 3 hours to even reach the city from the airport and the city that needed the most intricate intro possible. Anyways, Istanbul, the capital, no, largest city in Turkey, no, Turkey, no. You know what? F this. If you really can't even decide an English name for this country, let's just use the only good name for it, Turkey. Turkey is a vast country, so much in fact that it borders 8 countries, some friendly, some not so much. Add to that, the country is situated on 2 continents at once, Europe and Asia, making it one of the few transcontinental countries to exist. Our 97% of the country is in Asia, the majority of it on the Anatolian Peninsula, or Asia Minor if you really want to sound like some ancient philosopher, where much of the largest cities, including the capital, are located in. However, all of that is for another day, as in this video we visit the ancient city that is the metropolis of Istanbul, right on the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and also being the largest city in Europe, as well as the 15th largest city in the whole world. One could say that today Istanbul is the center of the modern world, as the airports and seaports there are massive and crucially important for connection between Europe, Asia, Africa and beyond. The Turkish Straits connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean is also a crucially important feature not to miss, but it has been this way for a while. Throughout history, Istanbul served many trade routes and empires passing through it, so all the glory seen in the city shouldn't come as a shocker. But as we dive into the city, which again takes around 3 damn hours to do with the metro,
Bu metro Amerika'da olsaydı beğenirdim.
it's necessary to get a brief understanding of the city's dense history, and what better man to help me out with this than a local I met up with.
The city has a vibrant and diverse history spanning over 2,000 years. It was originally founded as Byzantium by Greek settlers in the 7th century BC. Due to its strategic location, trade and culture flourished, and it was chosen as the capital of the Roman Empire by Emperor Constantine the Great. Under his rule, the city became the political and cultural heart of the Byzantine Empire. Under the Romans, the city thrived as a beacon of Christianity, and many great monuments were constructed. It faced constant invasions from barbarian tribes, Arab forces and the Crusaders. However, it remained a significant power until the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Latin Crusaders sacked the city. The Byzantines eventually regained control in 1261 but were severely weakened. In 1453, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II laid siege to the city, testing its formidable Theodosian walls, which were breached. And on May the 29th, the city fell to the Ottomans.
Haha, I am the emperor of all Romans. No one can defeat me, not at least some Turk.
I am inside your walls.
What?
Literally, inside your wall.
Mehmed II proclaimed Constantinople as the new capital of the Ottoman Empire. Under the Ottomans, Constantinople was transformed into a bustling cosmopolitan center embracing various cultures. The Ottomans left behind magnificent structures. The city remained an important trade hub connecting Asia and Europe. Following World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the city fell under occupation by Allied forces. The national government led by Mustafa Kemal abolished the Sultanate and forced the Allies to depart from the city after defeating the Greeks in a war. A new Turkish Republic was established, with Ankara as its capital due to it being the center of the national government. Istanbul went through great structural change, with new infrastructure, neighborhoods and avenues being developed. In 1942, a wealth tax was enforced on the city's non-Muslim population, leading to the transfer of many businesses owned by the religious minorities, which left the city in later years. The population of the city began to increase rapidly in the 70s, with people from Anatolia searching for employment moving in, which caused a rapid growth in the metropolitan area of the city, absorbing neighboring towns and villages.
And of course, the latest historic event, Estoniaball visiting the city upon the request of thousands of Turks in the comment sections. So, to get to Erdogan's playground, I had to fly to the deeply concerningly large airport. This I achieved not with Turkish Airlines or any other normal airline, but Air Baltic, of all of them. To start exploring the old city, our first destination is none other than the glorious Galata Tower. Standing at 63 meters, this beautiful piece of the Istanbul's skyline was built in 1348. See, at the time of its construction, the most iconic rivals in Italy, Genoa and Venice of course, all wanted to capitalize on Constantinople's maritime potential. In came the Genoans, released of the Byzantines, and got special maritime rights, fancy words for controlling the supply chain and sinking Venetian ships. And partly for that, they built what would be known as the Tower of Christ, and some Genoans were even oh so generous to bring back stuff to the tower, just to later fall into the hands of the Turks. After the fall of Constantinople, the tower was rebuilt and repurposed to spot fires around town. Nowadays, of course, the tower has evolved from spotting fires to spotting and attracting tourists. Oh, and how could I forget? The views were fucking amazing at night. All things said, I very highly suggest you visit the tower. Trust me, just to skip away is another landmark site, the Istiklal Avenue. Known as the main shopping and pedestrian street, with cars occasionally passing by, not giving a shit, the avenue is home to all sorts of interesting attractions, such as the old trams, which no one wants to pay for, so they just stand out the edge, the Syrian Passage, and the Chichek Passage, which are basically just some indoor streets with expensive restaurants and cafes, and oh shit, the Swedish consulate. And then the best attraction of them all,
I am more white than you. You look just.
aside from the most peaceful duo in Europe, next to the avenue is the Venetian neo-Gothic Church of St. Anthony of Padua, the largest Catholic church in Turkey. Built originally in 1725, it was demolished and rebuilt, designed by a Levantine architect and built by Italians for Italians. Oh, and also Pope John the 23rd preached here for 10 years as the Vatican's ambassador to Turkey until he became Pope, and due to his fluency in the language, he would be named the Turkish Pope. With all things said, what makes the Istiklal Avenue so special, at least in my opinion, is that the street has a mix of all kinds of different architecture, since Turkey doesn't really have one of its own. Besides, well, the Ottoman style mosques, I suppose. I mean, look, you got Art Nouveau and all these other ones I'm too lazy to research about. Whatever the case, at the end of the street lies Taksim Square, known as the modern heart of Istanbul, as it is pretty much as close as you can go to the dead center of the city. Right. The square, though large, is relatively empty and boring. At the square there is the nowadays iconic Taksim Mosque, which, though tourists like you and me seem nice to glance at, no locals really like it here, because it was built in 2021 by the Eggman himself, to basically show Turkish nationalism. My favorite part of the square would have to be the public monument that honors what is known here, I say this because of the Greek army and the Balkan as a Turkish war of independence. The monument is centralized around the Turkish national hero Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, we heard about in a history lecture a few minutes ago, honoring him and his followers' heroism for the Republic. On one side you have Atatürk and other government officials of various different races, which depicts his presidential life as well as racial diversity and equality. And on the other, he is diving headfirst into battle with his army behind him, depicting him in a military action during the war. Away from the hustle and bustle of the main street and main square are a few other peculiar places of interest, namely the damn good looking American consulate that was abandoned in 2015 for some minor inconvenience. Next to that is the Italian consulate. Now, the funny thing about this consulate in particular is that they still have the King's seal. Oh, and while we're on the topic of the Crimean War, to thank the coalition of France, Sardinia, but mostly Britain for saving the Ottomans' asses when Russia launched their great tyranny on them, they built an Anglican church right at the busy streets, accurately named the Crimean Church. And then there is the Kilij Ali Pasha Square, where there's also a modern art museum, but who cares about that? Am I right? Or am I right? And right here is where we encounter the Bosphorus. Here they have Venetian architecture, Vision Street, and finally, the famous Galata Bridge. While the bridge itself may seem boring at first, it is a DLC that comes with it that is the real charm. The first thing you immediately notice is the magnificent view of the Golden Horse of Fatih, Istanbul's most historic district, which is where we'll soon be heading. Walking over the bridge, one will also encounter the dozens, if not hundreds, of fishermen fulfilling their duties, both fishing and satisfying tourists, day and night. Finally, the current version of the bridge is relatively new, built in the 90s, however it too is old as shit, with the first model dating back to the 6th century. Immediately we are greeted by cool 17th century mosques. Then we reach the city's unarguably most historic square, the Sultan Ahmed Square, known historically as the Hippodrome. This otherwise mid-park has lots of older and oldest monuments to be found. So what is the summarized history of this place? Well, this area was first built as a hippodrome in 203 AD. After refounding Byzantium, Emperor Constantine renovated the hippodrome, with historians estimating the hippodrome to be, yes, very epic. Until the Venetians pillaged the fuck out of it and built their own cool buildings with the materials they had Romanian from them. Perhaps the most eye-catching sight in the square is this fancy stick, the obelisk of Theodosius. As for strength for Romans, they kept robbing obelisks from ancient Egypt, and this one is no different. Originally built somewhere around 1450 BC to commemorate Pharaoh Thutmose III's crossing of the Euphrates, it was transferred from Luxor to Constantinople. There is another obelisk, built as a turning point indicator for horse racing at the Hippodrome. While it may look boring and bricky like your ordinary commie block, this wasn't always the case, and with just one word you can understand why it came to be this way. Venice. They robbed all the artifacts just like they robbed my money. Finally, barely sticking out of the ground is the serpent column, originally built with 3 serpent heads all the way back in 478 BC to commemorate the Greek victory against the Persians at Plataea, until Constantine got bored and moved the monument from the Temple of Apollo to Constantinople. A few steps away from this ancient clusterfuck is the German fountain. It was built in 1898 by German and Italian architects and transported to Constantinople 2 years later, and was apparently built to honor Wilhelm II's ego trip to the city as he daydreamed about making a railway to Baghdad. Just a skip away is one of Istanbul's most meaningful and beautiful architectural works, officially known as the Sultan Ahmed Mosque or the Blue Mosque. The reason why it's called the latter is because when it was built you could see like lots of blue tiles inside the mosque and shit. So why was this monolith of gorgeous architecture built, and what's with its name? Well, during the early 1600s Ottoman Empire under Sultan Ahmed I suffered a few minor setbacks, first trying to assert dominance over the Habsburgs, failed miserably, and then getting an ass whipping of a lifetime by Persians in a 15-year-long war. So, as any logical thinker, he decided the best way to reaffirm the Ottoman power, both to the citizens and their foes, was to spend excessive amounts of money, of course, but like with every project costing even $1 more than usual, it came with large controversy. See, during the time, it was more common to build these types of things from spoils of war, but as mentioned, this was anything but a great success. First, this combination of Byzantine and Ottoman thought mosque had to be financed by, oh dear, the state treasury. No! After visiting the first mosque in my life, I wanted to get some ice cream, but since this is Turkey, ah shit, now why does this seem so familiar? Anyways, on the other end of the square there is none other than the truly one and only Hagia Sophia, though Hagia Sophia, or however the fuck you call it. The name is literally meaning translated to Holy Wisdom. The mosque is arguably one of humanity's greatest works. Hell, why can't this be considered a world wonder? It was built 3 times throughout history, with this one we know being finished in the 6th century. And best of all, taking into account the time period and this detail, it was built in just 5 years. And about this, the first edition was built in either 360 or 346 AD, and made Magna Ecclesia, but it was burned down by rebels and rebuilt in 415 AD, but just for reassurance they built it down again, and built it up again in 532 AD, which is the model we know today. Tons of Roman gold and goods from all around the Mediterranean were brought in for interior and exterior alike. In the 10th century, after the Rus-Byzantine War, the widow of the Prince of Kiev was baptized in the cathedral, which was a starting point for the eventual Christianization of the East Slavs. After they did their day-to-day ransacking and the empire was restored after the Fourth Crusade, the Catholics wouldn't stop dissing it as a Hellenic temple of Roman paganism. Well, don't worry, the Muslims have arrived and they immediately converted it into a mosque. No, you can't just turn one of our most sacred religious site into a mosque, Ottusbir. Even so, it would still retain its title as the largest cathedral in the world until the early 1500s, when it was surpassed by some Spaniards who put an Uno Rebuscan and converted a mosque into a church. Anyway, in 1931, the mosque was closed and reopened 4 years later as a museum. But then in 2020, bros were thinking they were the new Mehmet II, reverted it into a mosque, which totally didn't piss off a fuck ton of people. Generally, whatever the Hagia Sophia is, there will always be controversy. Some want it to be a mosque, some want it to be a museum, some want it to be a church. I say fuck all and make it a synagogue. But whatever the case, Hagia Sophia's beauty, glory and influence is undeniable. The interior and exterior are both just a marvel to behold. So there's no wonder then that all these churches, these mosques in Istanbul, and these synagogues have all had some sort of inspiration taken from the Hagia Sophia. And these are just some examples from Wikipedia. There are likely to be lots more. Right behind the Hagia Sophia is a smaller Hagia, Hagia Irene, known as the oldest church in Istanbul that still stands. The first edition was believed to have been built in the 4th century, some time before its big brother, and like it, the church too was fully rebuilt in 563 after the rebellion. While it would have been interesting to see, the line to get in was going slower than the Turkish application process, so I forgot about that and instead headed to another landmark, right in front of it, the Topkapi Palace. Now, going through the whole thing in detail is an impossible concept, and I implore you to go check it out for yourself, but to give you the rundown, Topkapi, meaning Cannon Gate, was built as the royal residence of Ottoman sultans in 1465. The place is filled with all sorts of pottery, weaponry and other goods. What the courtyard of the harem, or as I like to call it, Turkish backrooms, is a whole different story, man. You go into some small side room, thinking it's whatever, and you end up going down rooms and rooms as if it never ends. But in spite of all this wealth, exotic goods and never-ending chambers, less and less sultans would stay here as time went on. On top of that, the empire wanted to Europeanize, so they moved to the Dolmabahce Palace. Still, there is arguably no better place to get to know all about the sultans and the rich history of the Ottoman dynasty. Right beside the palace is the Gülhane Park, which is one of the main ones in the city, kind of like a Hyde Park of Istanbul, if you will. I mean, one, both of them are next to the former former palaces of their emperors, and 2, when I went to them, they were both like paradise compared to the shitty Estoniaball I had just escaped. But at the edge of the park stands one of the city's most peculiar and overlooked monuments, the Column of the Goths. It's a monument of the Roman victory over the Goths, an event which happened before Byzantium was even considered a proper city, all the way back in the 3rd century AD. Well, all I can say is El Goths. And finally, the last attraction around the Sultan Ahmed Square, Basilica Cistern. Built first between the 3rd and 4th centuries, this massive fucking water aqueduct was expanded and rebuilt numerous times. Hell, the last time it was renovated was less than a year before I went there. For Istanbul is surrounded by sea and literally all France. It was historically a water-deprived city, and the cistern became the main water supply in and around the city, with a balanced water supply line stretching 426 kilometers, taking the title of the longest of its kind in the Roman world. Besides the historical facts though, the place is simply great. Good ambience, good architecture and more. But alas, we must move on. Continuing westward like the Turks in the 1500s, we hit the Grand Bazaar, but the place where dozens of sellers go up to you like, "Merhaba my friend, look at this carpeta, very good, very nice, special price for you, 300 lira." And you'll never know how much you pay for because the lira goes up and down like life goes. But even so, here you have to go 200. They say no! You say yes! They say okay. Anyways, the Grand Bazaar is one of the largest and oldest covered markets in the world, dating back to 1455, right after the fall of Constantinople. This was built first to primarily sell textiles, but with the Ottoman Empire reaching its peak and the bazaar got its expansion pack in the 18th century, almost anything could be found here. Most prominently is jewelry, Turkish delights, colorful clothing, the filthy Slavs who rebelled against the mighty Sultan, and that's how it remains, except for maybe the Slavs. But maybe if you look hard enough, today all of that is sold across 61 streets and 4,000 active shops, and receives in between 250 to 400,000 shoppers daily. So with those big boy numbers, you can see why in 2014 it recorded over 91,250,000 annual visitors. Just to skip away is another iconic city square with a mosque and most prominently the cascades which lead to Istanbul University. And here we have drunk dogs right next to the university building. Not far uphill is a very overlooked mosque, the Süleymaniye Mosque. Although it is known well for its appearance on the Golden Horn skyline, I saw few people really visit the mosque itself. It was commissioned by none other than Europe annihilator Suleiman the Magnificent. In 1557, a magnificent mosque was built for Suleiman the Magnificent. But seriously, the mosque is truly epic. I'd say it can even rival the Blue Mosque in terms of the beauty. Oh yeah, and it was also used as a weapon depot during World War I. Just like the war itself, that didn't go too well and the mosque caught fire, after already getting that experience 2 times before, and it wasn't fully restored until 1956. Going even further west, we eventually hit another defining symbol of the old Byzantine city, the walls of Constantinople. While there were many wall complexes around the city, these ones are the biggest and most well renowned, as they were the defining border between the city of world desire and the wild west of the Roman and later Byzantine Empire, the Balkans. Even with all the sieges and triumphs it has endured, much of the walls remain intact or have been rebuilt. Although one thing that it has definitely failed in is containing the city's expansion, because now it has expanded way beyond the old walls. Like holy shit! Apparently somewhere by the walls is a panorama museum at the fall of Constantinople, which I unfortunately didn't have time to see this time around. Nonetheless, backtracking towards the center, we reach another one of Istanbul's most interesting neighborhoods, Balat. This little hilly, colorful and quiet part of the city is another OG of Istanbul. It's estimated to have been founded somewhere in the 5th or 6th century with the name Balat deriving from the Greek word Palation or the Latin word Palatium, both meaning palace. Like the paint on the houses, the district was very diverse in nationalities, most of them Greek. However, unlike said colorful houses, the history is very dark, and you can pause to read about it here, and these scarring events are still visible today. Notably, one of the most eye-catching places in the quarter, a lavish Greek school built by Greeks and for Greeks only, now only has one active class. Not sure how to move out of that. Oh, right at the edge of Balat is the venerable patriarchal church of St. George, which is the principal Eastern Orthodox cathedral in Istanbul. Known also as the St. George's Church or the St. George's Patriarchal Temple, it was built and became the seat of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople around 1600. Being so unique, I wish I could have gone and seen it up close, but it was close at that point already, which is understandable, but you know. But now, as the historical heartland is through, let's take a trip to what is undoubtedly the biggest geographical anomaly in the city. As I mentioned before, the country is transcontinental, and conveniently, so is Istanbul. Namely, it's the famous Bosphorus Strait that dissects the 2 continents. Why did it make it straight the arbitrary line? That's not up for me to decide, but whatever the case, it is a very interesting anomaly indeed. One 20-minute ferry ride later, we end up in one of 2 only districts worth seeing on the Asian side, Karakköy. Due to its advantageous position, Phoenicians were largely active in the empire business. As for the Megarians, who made it a colony of theirs in 685 BC, this is where it also got its original name, Halkedon, meaning City of the Blind. But even with such an unfortunate name, it thrived until it was captured by the Persians and soon after the Romans. During Byzantine rule, the city suffered somewhat as all the shining was now centered around Pesach Constantinople, which I remind you they were two separate cities at the time. With that, not much was done here other than it being used as a quarry, an ecumenical council being held there, and constantly being taken empire by empire during dozens of sieges, until in 1353, not 1453, it fell to the Turks. Once the Ottomans had their troll complete, they put the city under their jurisdiction of the Constantinople courts, which is where the modern name comes from, thereby joining the city and becoming a residential area, springy with markets and selling agricultural goods everywhere. Today its main shining lights are the Haydar Pasha terminal, which was Turkey's biggest railway station until it was closed for renovation in 2014. The most important part is that here lies also the country's largest shipping port. So with that out of the way, what does Kadıköy have to offer today? It is fucking cheap and I love it. When the day prior we had basically gone and scammed at a cafe in Fatih, getting this for like 15 lira was very nice. As for sightseeing, there are the odd trams. Don't do the same mistakes I did with not going around the whole way with one ticket. There's also some Bull statue, which is now an admittedly mid-tourist attraction but had a long history, which was built by the French to commemorate the victory against Germany and also Lorraine in 1864. It didn't really age well, and just 6 years later the crowds moved the statue and also Lorraine to Germany. Then during World War I, it was sent to Constantinople as a gift to the Sultan. In 1955 it was moved from the long abandoned Yıldız Palace to a hotel, then to the Kadıköy Municipality building, and finally to the Atıyol intersection where it stands today. Is there any meaning to the statue now? I don't know, maybe, but I couldn't be bothered. And then once that's all well and done, the next best thing to do in Kadıköy is to leave. So, welcome to Üsküdar. While it's a whole other district, it is best known for its chilled seaside area, or for its strategic position as both a ferry and metro terminal. And mind-blowingly, we used both of them. Like its neighbor, the godforsaken Kadıköy, it too was founded before Byzantium by Megara colonists in the 7th century BC. The city became known as Chrysopolis. Eventually the Athenians conquered the city and did what the city's later inhabitants would do a millennia later, charging tolls on all ships operating around the Bosphorus.
Here comes the money!
In 324 AD, Constantine the Chad defeated Licinius in a battle here, which ended the period of Tetrarchy, which was a silly little concept meant to prolong Rome's miserable downfall. Anyways, during Byzantine times, many armies seized the city, and by doing so, threatened Constantinople. But it didn't matter, until it did in 1338 when the Ottomans seized it. By the time, the city had changed its name to Skotarion, or Skotari, okay. It was renamed only during the Turkish Republic, as when all those armies from the Byzantine days raided the district, they called the place Üsküdar or Eskoter, and there you have it, brilliant logic. But okay, so what does Üsküdar have to offer now anyway? Well, apparently they have lots of cool mosques, but from what I saw, a nice line of residential buildings located on hills, and a great view to the Bosphorus. Across the strait you can see the Beyoğlu district again, and Üsküdar's most famous attraction, the Maiden's Tower. One day in 1110, the Emperor of Byzantine just woke up and decided to build a wooden tower, which later became handy when it was garrisoned by a bunch of Venetians during the fall of Constantinople. After that funny, the tower conveniently became used as a watchtower. It had to be renovated numerous times throughout history, including the latest one, still ongoing since 2021. And yeah, that would be the Maiden's Tower, Üsküdar, and Istanbul as a whole. If you couldn't guess by now, I loved every second of it. The history, blend of architecture, culture, cuisine, and geography here is unlike anywhere I've ever seen before. I hope this little video gave you some sort of opinion on Istanbul. As truth be told, there are lots more things that I didn't have time to see this time around. With every building and street having a story of its own, passed between many of the world's greatest empires, it really isn't a wonder then that the city's historical nickname is the City of World's Desire, a title which in my humble opinion it holds to this day. And hell, there's so much more to see in Turkey overall, so I cannot wait to come back. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks a lot to this whole group of people for helping me make this video. İzlediğiniz için teşekkürler. Yakında görüşürüz.